and Shmuel, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Toby Peres, Sarah Tova, Bas Yisrael Dove. Charlie Gelfenstein, Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachel Mata Bas Asher. Friends of Nina Moinister, Nechama Asna Bas Yitzchak Aaron. Friends of Stephen of Vigdor, Simcha Meir ben Meir Lev Halev. Simcha Melech ben Meir Lev Halevi. Friends of Marcy Kurtz, in memory of her great niece. Month of Learning, David and Mindel Cheslow, in memory of his father, Moshe ben Reuven Mordechai. Susan and Reuven Podolsky, in memory of her father, Simcha Bunim ben Yeshua, and her mother, Chaya Bas Rav Avram Doi. Haran and Melhaler, in memory of her father, Yosef Elazar ben Tzvi Hersh. Beatrice Pizer, in memory of her father, Yisachar Dov ben Shmuel. Stanley Presser, in memory of his wife, Chayalea Bas Zeb HaKoyen. And a week of learning, Judy and Michael Peretsky, in memory of her mother, Razel Bas Rebuta Lev. That's it.
There's 19.
Okay. No, we ran out of names at the 17.
Hope we win.
All right, where am I? I'm on Ayin Gimel? Okay. So at the bottom of Ayin Base, at the we learned about the para. Pasuk says that in the plural they take, and then it says, and he puts. So there was a discussion. If it both were in the singular, Rabbi Yehuda would have said the same person has to do both. Therefore, the pasuk changes from plural to singular. The ikas of Rachmana lekachu of anasnu, if it was both plural, I would have thought that you could have multiple participants in the putting the ashes into the water in the tube. So the afilu shakale trey yahavchad, even if two takes the, and so the bottom line is, it says plural singular, to teach us that multiple people can do the gathering, but one person must sprinkle the ashes on top of the water in the tube. Okay, so now we're on Ayin Gimel Omid Aleph. The pasuk says, V'hiza hatahar al tameh. A tahor person must sprinkle on a tameh person. Now, interestingly, the Gemara is now going to take that pasuk, which you and I read as perfectly simple. A tahor person sprinkles on the non-tahor person. And it's going to say, if God really wanted to say that, he'd have said somebody that's Eino Tameh sprinkles on someone who's Tameh. That would have meant that someone who is not at all Tameh in any way, shape, or form does the spritzing on the person who is Tameh. But by using a different noun, by using a Tahor person, Tahor, Miklal Shehu Tameh, that it implies that there is some tinge of Tumah in that person.
Correct.
Oh, thank you.
The reason why I said it's full yom, I want to say, is technically.
The Gomer is going to say that just like that. If you look ahead, do not allow to look ahead and cheat and tell me what it's going to say in 3 words. Limed al tvul yom shekasher b'para. So a Kohen who was Tameh, he went through whatever purification, depending on what level of Tumah he was on. He goes to the mikveh during the daytime, and in order to be to deal with truma, he's got to wait till nightfall. But in this case, even if he's just the Tvul Yom, he can do the spritzing. Okay, boy, me name Rav Sheshes. So they asked him it's a shaila. Now, if you will recall, earlier, would you do me a favor, Heshi? Toss me the tissues. Just toss the box. Okay. So, all right. So, if you recall, we were discussing with regard to eating Pesach and with regard to Truma, that does a person who has a foreskin, an orel, is he like a Tomei person? And we made Hakashim over there. So, boy, me name Rav Sheshes. They went to Rav Sheshes and asked him, Orel Mahu b'Meiser. What is the law with regard to Meiser Sheni? Can someone who is uncircumcised eat Meiser Sheni? So, what kind of question is that? The Yolef Pesach b'Meiser le'inyan aninus. Since we learned that an onen cannot eat korban Pesach because an onen cannot eat Meiser Sheni, Yalif Nami Meiser mi Pesach le'inyan arelus. Do we go back? In other words, if we can go from right to left, can we also go from left to right and say, just as an Arabi, we're making a comparison with Meiser Sheni, just as an Orel cannot eat korban Pesach, maybe he cannot eat Meiser Sheni. That's one way of looking at it. Dilma, the other way of looking at it, Chomer Mikal Yalef, you can learn something stricter from something less strict. Kal v'chomer Yolalef, but something less, you cannot make something that's less strict forbidden, for example, based on something that's more strict.
You can't have a chomer v'chal.
Okay. No, kal v'chomer is
works, but not chomer v'chal.
No, kal v'chomer means if it applies to the lenient, certainly it applies to the stringent. But you can't say if it applies to the stringent, certainly it applies to the lenient. That doesn't make sense. That's what the Gemara just said. So Omar Lahu, Reb Shesha says, why are you bothering me with that? Taninha, we learned that already. Truma v'habikurim. We have truma, which is only a kohen can eat, and bikurim that are brought on Shavuos that only a kohen can eat. And if somebody who's not a kohen or or a tamei kohen or a kohen with a mum, anybody who's not qualified to eat those things, chayavin aleihem misa. The punishment is misa b'dei shemayim. And if a non-kohen is the culprit, the chamesh. If he eats $100 worth, he has to give back 125. Va'asur and lazarim, and as implied by the word chamesh, they're forbidden to a non-kohen. Vehen nichse kohen. And in terms of who owns them, they're the property of the kohen to whom they're given. Okay? The oilin b'chad v'meya, and if a piece of truma or some of the bikurim, it falls into a barrel of chulin, the ratio to be mavatel is 101, not 1 in 60. 1 in 101. Ta'unin rechitzas yodayim. And if a kohen wants to eat truma or bikurim, he has to wash his hands just the way everybody has to wash for bread. V'harev shemesh. And if he's tamei and he went to the mikveh, he has to wait till after nightfall in order to eat. Okay, those are a whole list of chumras on Truma and Bikurim. Hare elu betrumo bikurim, masha ein kain b'maiser. And none of those restrictions apply to Meiser. Anybody can eat Meiser, etc., etc. You don't have to wash if it's not grain Meiser. The im isa. So what do we say over here? Listen, if the Mishnah wanted to tell us that we can't say that because of the stringency of Pesach, the Orel can eat Meiser Sheni. If we wanted to say that, Lisne Orel Asur Behem. We did, in other words, if we wanted to tell you the rule that an Orel cannot eat Meiser Sheni, it should have been on the list. The Mishnah should have told us that. Masha Ein Baba Meiser, which does not apply to Meiser. The Mishnah does not do that. So we're going to say, since the Mishnah doesn't say you can, we're going to say you can't. Tana v'shai. So, but maybe that's not true. Maybe when we make lists of things, if there are 23 things and I make a list of 15, that's legitimate. But if there are 23 things and I make a list of 22, that's not legitimate. So if I want to say that an RL is included but not listed, I have to come up with at least one more thing that's not in the list, that's not allowed to eat Truma. Tana v'shayir. We want to say that Tana taught part of the list, but he left other items out. My shire, Tahai shire. What else did he leave out? That he could legitimately leave out that an Orel cannot eat Meiser Sheni. Shire, he did leave other things out. The Ko Tani Seifa, because later on in the Mishnah it says, Yesh b'Meiser u'b'Bikurim, there are rules that apply to Meiser and to Bikurim, Mashe Ein Bo Kain B'Truma, which do not apply to Truma, and Shahamaiser v'Habikurim Ta'unin Haba'as Makom. With regard to Meiser and Bikurim, you have to bring them to Jerusalem, to that place, the special place. Uta'unin Vidui. Both with Meiser Sheni and with Bikurim, there's a Vidui. The Vidui is the paragraph, my father was an Amaramean, that's in the Haggadah. And they ask, why did they do that in the Haggadah instead of reading like much more stuff from Shmos? Because that's in the first person. And you want to be as if you were there. So you use the first person Vidui as the basis, and then you schlep in psukim from Shmos.
Had to be brought
to Jerusalem. Yeah, your first fruit you can't eat in Pittsburgh. You got to fly to Jerusalem with it. And you got to stand there with the decorated basket. You got to say the Vidui, and the Kohen waves it around, and then he splits it with the other Kohanim. Okay, the Aser La'oinen and Bikurim and Meiser are forbidden to anoint it. The Rabbi Shimon Matirs. Okay, but Reb Shimon says that anointing can eat them. V'chayavin b'biur, and Meiser Sheni and Bikurim, if they become tamei, must be destroyed, burning. Rabbi Shimon Paiter, Rabbi Shimon says you don't have to. The ilu aser obayer mehen betumo. Now, the rule is that if you burn Meiser Sheni that became Tameh, or you burn Bikurim that became Tameh, even the fire is Aser Bahana. Okay? So, for example, you have a basket of grain that's Bikurim, and it's Tameh. So you say, you know what I'll do? I'll fire my barbecue with it and I'll cook steaks. Can't do that. However, but when it comes to Truma, that's tame, you can use it to fire your barbecue and broil your steaks. Turn the page. V'oichlin betumas atzman loika. If you decide, this is good stuff, I don't want to burn it. Nobody's looking. I'm going to eat it. Had someone been looking and giving you hasra, you get malchus for eating tomei, bekurim or meiser, but not masha enkein betruma. There is no punishment for eating tomei truma. You're not allowed to do it, but there is no punishment. Lo Katani, Talmud doesn't teach any of those, the Mishnah doesn't teach any of those rules. Alma Tane V'Shire. So that's proof that it was not an exhaustive list, and we can say an Orel may not eat. Okay? Next. The Isurin La'oinen Rabbi Shimon Matir. The Bryce itself goes on to, the Mishnah rather, goes on to say, Meiser Sheni and Bikurim are not allowed to be eaten by an Onain, but Rabbi Shimon says he can. Menalahu, how do the rabbis know that that according to them, an Onain is not allowed? Diksiv, the Pasuk says, Lo tuchal le'echol, you may certainly not eat it, b'sha'arecha, in your communities, meaning not anywhere but Jerusalem, meiser v'dagoncha, the meiser of your grain, v'tiroscha, your grapes, v'yitzarecha, your oil, your olive oil, etc., o trumas yodecha, and the truma in your hand. So here we have the word truma designated. So you could learn that pasuk two ways. You could say, just like the meiser is and the bekurim, so too the truma. It's all in one pasuk. The din is the same. That's their ruling. Omar Mar, the Tanakama says, Trumas Yodacha Elu Bikurim. That's the Bikurim. The Iskesh, and he makes a Hekesh, Bikurim Lemeiser. First part of the pasuk is Meiser. The word Truma here means Bikurim. Just as these rules apply to this, these same rules apply to that. Okay, Ma Meiser Oinen, just like a Meiser we acknowledge can't be eaten by an Oinen, not Bikurim Osila Oinen. Rabbi Shimon says Truma Karinahu. The pasuk doesn't keep going and says you can't eat the grain, you can't eat the oil, you can't eat the grapes, you can't eat the bikurim. It doesn't say that. It uses the word truma, and we have to figure out truma means bikurim because he wanted to isolate it. Okay, truma karinahu rachmana. The Torah says truma. Ma truma muteres la'oinen, just as truma is permitted to an onen. It used the word truma to hint that bikurim have the same din as truma. And bikurim muter la'oinen, and therefore bikurim should also be muter to an onen. So that was the first argument they had. The second argument they had, V'chayim biyur v'Rebbi Shimon Poiter. The Mishnah says that the Meiser Sheni and Bikurim must be burned and you cannot benefit from the fire. And Reb Shimon says that's not so. Mar Makish, so the Tanakama, who is the Chachamim, makes this Hekesh, Mar Lo Makish. Same rationale, same pasuk, he doesn't make the Hekesh. Okay. Now, va'aser levayer mehen betuma. You cannot make benefit of the burning if the Meiser Sheni and the Bikurim are tome. V'ochlin v'tumas atzman loike. And if you choose to eat them when those foodstuffs are tameh, you get malchus. Okay? Now, Minolan, how do we know all of this? Desanya, we have a brisa that says, Reb Shimon Aimer, Lo mibarti mimenu bitumai. I did not burn it. Lo mibarti, a guy is stating, I did not, when you bring to Yerushalayim, part of the vidoy on Meiser is lo bi'arti mimenu bituma. I did not burn any of it and use that flame when it was tameh. Ben sha'ani tameh v'hu tahar. Neither I was tameh and the food itself was tahar. Ben sha'ani tahar v'hu tameh, or I was tahar and the food was tameh. Heicha muzhar al achilaso. So where in the Torah do we have an hashara for that? He says, Ani Yadea. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it is. Okay, but so the Gemara says, Tuma, Guf, Behed Yiksive. What do you mean you don't know? It explicitly tells us a Tomei person can't eat Kachim or Truma. Okay? Nefesh Asher Tiga Bo V'Tama. Anything that a person touches that's tameh and it makes him tameh, adha arev lo yochal, he cannot eat from it. Min hakadoshim, not from kodshim. Ki im rachatz b'saru b'mayim, until he goes to the mikveh. So in this pasuk it says, A, he has to go to the mikveh, and B, he has to wait till nightfall. What are you telling me? There's no hazara. It's right there. So this is how Reb Shimon, what Reb Shimon is really asking. Tumas atzmo menayan. How do we know that a tahor person cannot eat meiser sheni when the meiser sheni is tameh? Okay, Talmud Laimar. So we have an answer to that. Lo tuchol lechol b'sharecha meiser degonecha. You may not eat outside of Jerusalem meiser of your grain. O b'halan huaymer, and another pasuk it says, b'sharecha tochlenu hatamei v'hatahar yachdav kitzvi uka'ayil. You could eat out if you have tahor meat. You're not a chaver. You are not makbid on tumen tahor. You have tahor meat and you have not tahor grain. You can cook them together. You can make a stew with them. It would be no problem. Okay, okay. You can put it. There's no problem. Just as you can eat deer and non-korban meat that can't be used as a korban. So too, even if that meat could be used as a korban, you could eat it together. But Tanya debei Reb Shmuel, and it says that what I just said, afilu tamei v'tahar oichlin ala shulchan. They can both be on the table, and you could eat both together. Echad b'ka'ay rachas, even on the same plate. Okay, and we're not concerned that the meat will become tameh through contact with the other food. That doesn't bother us. And that's why the pasuk says, with regard to meiser sheni, hahuda amre lochasam b'sharecha toichlenu. You can't. In the regular food, pasuk says you can eat anywhere you want. Hacha lo tacho. But here, with regard to meiser sheni, you only can eat it in one designated special place, and l'chayra there are other restrictions that may be applicable as well. Masha ein kain betruma, but that's not the rule with regard to truma. Truma can be anywhere, even though it's kudshim. And if the truma is tameh, you are required to burn it, but you can benefit from the flame. Minalon, how do I know that? Omer Revi Abuhu, Omer Rev Yochanan, Omer Kra, the pasuk says, Lo bi'arti mimenu betume. When we make our declaration, bikurim, I have, or Meiser Sheni, I have not burned any of it in tuma. Mimenu, the pasuk uses the word mimenu. Atom bayer, from it. It's a limiter. You can eat it from it. Avo atom bayer shemen shel truma shenitma. But you can use truma oil in lamps. It's not a problem, and benefit from the light, the heat. Okay. The aim, maybe we want to say mimenu iatum bayer. And of it, the Meiser Sheni, you cannot burn for personal use. Why do we say this pasuk applies to truma? Why don't we say, like the cod of oil they found in Hanukkah that belonged to the Kohen Gadol, if that becomes tameh, maybe the Kohen Gadol could use it in his lamps at home. Why do we say it applies to truma and not to kudshim mamish? Lav kal v'chomer. Isn't there a kal v'chomer that applies? Ma meiser hakal. Since the rules restricting the use of meiser sheni are less stringent, amr Torah lo bi'arti mimenu betumeh. And the Torah nevertheless requires to say, I didn't burn any of it where it or I were tameh and benefit therefrom. Kodesh chamor. But kodesh, stuff that's actually going on the Mizbeach, that's obviously more stringent, lo kol sheken. How much more so we should say you can't burn that and benefit. Okay, ihachi. But if you're going to tell me that, truma nami kal v'chomer hu. I can make a kal v'chomer and truma too. Haksiv mimenu. That's why the pasuk says mimenu, to say only the meiser and not the truma. Okay, so Mari, see what's the bottom line? Mistabra kodesh lo mamatina. It's logical not to exclude kudshim, real kudshim, shechen, and we have now a mnemonic pei nun kuf ayin beis samech, and that stands for pigul noiser carbon meila kares asur and asur la'oinen. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 restrictions. Adarabba. So you hold in your cup that those 6 restrictions. Adarabba, truma lo mamatina. Maybe we should not exclude truma from the list, because truma has a mnemonic also. Shechen mem ches pei zayin, which is misa. You get misa if the non-Kohen eats it. Chomesh, you have to pay the extra. Ein lo pidyon, you cannot be paida it. Va'asura lezorim, and a non-Kohen can't eat it. So we play to give them, okay. So here, hanach nafishan. So we played a math game. There was 6, here is 4. So it makes more sense to exclude the 6er rather than the 4er. Okay, and if you don't, I've been telling you now for days, we played a math game. If you're sick and tired of the math game, the Gemara is sympathetic, because the Gemara says, if you don't want to play the math game, you see that when it comes to Truma, the penalty is Misa B'dei Shemayim. And when it comes to Kodshim, the penalty is Kores, and Kores is worse. Okay. The Eichlen Betumas Atzman Loike. We said earlier, if you eat from these materials, Truma or Meiser Sheni or Bikurim, and the food itself is Tomei, you get Malchus for that. Malchus, okay. But Masha Ein came to Truma. But I said earlier, you do not get punished if you eat Truma that's Tomei. So why not? Milkahu v'lo loke. Truth of the matter is, you should get Malchus feeding Truma. It would be, you could infer it logically, but we can't apply Malchus. Ha asura ika, but it's still usur, it's still bad. So Minolan, how do we know all that? Omer Kra, the pasuk says, "B'sha'arecha teichlena," you can eat it wherever you want. Lo zeh v'lo la'acher, for that and not for the other thing, which is the truma. That means you can eat tomei bechor meat if you have a bechor, the firstborn animal. If it's born as a nice looking little shepsel, you have to give it to a kohen. And the kohen has to take it to Jerusalem. He has to shecht it. It's his carbon, and he can eat from it. If the animal has a mum, prior to you can't cheat and hang out till it gets a mum. But if it gets a mum before the kohen comes to pick it up, or if it's born with a mum, there's no pidyon required. There are some restrictions, but it becomes a non-bechor in terms of the owner, the czar, can eat it. Okay, and so this is a lav haba miklal ase. When a negative rule is derived from a positive rule, the rule here is the animal is perfect. You give it to a kohen, only he can eat it. So we infer if it's imperfect, anybody can eat it. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say do not eat, right? Unless it has a mum. So it's a lav derived from an aseh, and when it's a lav derived from an aseh, you can't give malchus. Okay. And we'll just wrap up a little bit more. Omer of Ashi Meresha Nami Shamat Mina, the Tana V'Shayer. We didn't have to go through all of this. We could have left 20 minutes ago, because in the very beginning we had some things on the list and some things left out. Midalo Katani, because you know what else he left out? No Hagen B'shar Shnei Shavua, because the mitzvahs of Truma and Bikurim work only during 6 years of the Shemitah cycle. V'ein lehem pidyon, you can't redeem them. Like you can redeem Meiser Sheni, bring the money to Israel, to Jerusalem, but you can't do that with Bikurim. You have to bring the actual food, and you can't do that with Truma. The Kohen has to eat it. He can't redeem it and sell it or give it to you. Masha Ein came by Meiser. All of those rules do not apply to Meiser. You can redeem Meiser Sheni. Shema Mino. So we learn, without going through all the Gemara we went through, that there were things left out of the original list, and Shema Mino, that's what we understand. All right, tomorrow I will not be with you. Reuven, fine. Bring a bottle, bring cake, make a simcha. Reuven will give the shir tomorrow. I'll see you again on Monday. And if you have in mind, my wife is having a little surgery tomorrow. Nothing terribly serious, but all of your prayers will assure that it goes well. Sunday I will neither be here. If the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise.
What's
You
the
already said-
Hebrew name? Miriam?
Rus Miriam Bas Sarah.
Complete report.
Can I get a ride home? Don't forget your phone.
You want me to take you home?
No, Bob.
Oh, you won't go
You're
with,
going-
okay,
No,
you're
no,
join the crowd.
You don't have to go out of the way. He's going to the.
Just Miriam Basar.
Okay, Ruben.
I said, bad enough he's got you, I take him too.
Sure. Have a good day, Harvey.
Be good. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
And I'm